which lays the foundation that the Jesuits have controlled education, the cinema, theater for centuries, and still do today. He makes this premise by studying the history and life of Amadeus Mozart, showing categorically through factual evidence that Mozart was a fraud and created for control reasons by the Catholic Church and the Roman hierarchy with the Jesuits. Now, today we're going to talk specifics again with Robert about some of his claims, as well as talking about some of the general ramifications of this Mozart fraud. Now, some of you may think this is a frivolous subject. I think it is very serious, very important, and if we lay a foundation correctly, I think you'll see what I mean. Now, let me do this for a few minutes, and let me indulge myself, Robert, so that I've looked up a few things, and I know you have too. And I just wanted to start out by saying that Gary Wills, in a book called Witches and Jesuits, points this out. He says Macbeth, and we know about Shakespeare, and he says Macbeth is an elaborate condemnation of the Jesuits as Satanists, murderers, witches. Macbeth is one of the many of its period's powder plays, a genre in which certain buzzwords, well understood by contemporaries, memorialize the guilt and execution of 8 Jesuits for having schemed the gunpowder plot of November 5th, 1605. The plot aimed to blow up the entire government of Great Britain, including the royal family, in a single catastrophic explosion under the House of Parliament. But how could a play that defames Jesuits be of service to the Jesuit agenda? Now, Tupper Saucy in his book says, as we shall see, warfare in defense of the papacy requires extravagant measures. In fact, both the gunpowder plot, which failed, and the celebration of its direction, which lives on in Macbeth, serve Rome abundantly. King James I, who declared himself the plot's divinely illumined discoverer, blamed the plot on the Jesuits and papists, but at the same time, James exonerated less fanatical Catholics. And according to Wills in his book, Witches and Jesuits, the plot gave James his best opportunity to separate loyal and moderate Catholics from the mad extremists of the plot. In short, the plot secured England for loyal and moderate Roman Catholicism. Now, if we move further, we will see that, now, Americans, you just think about this. Riding the crest of humanist exuberance following Loyola's canonization, which, I might add, was the biggest theatrical event of its time, canonizing a murderer and killer like him, when it says in the Bible that anyone who hears the word of God is a saint. We don't need to go through this hierarchical Roman Catholic red tape that they're going through today to canonize Pope Pius XII, who was one of the biggest killers in Nazi Germany. Unbelievable. But anyway, it goes on still today. Now, think about this. A Jesuit priest named Kirchner, 1602 to 1680, contributed powerfully to Jesuit theater as a sensory experience. He created the megaphone, which enabled his voice to reach thousands. Kirchner, in fact, invented broadcasting. He's a Jesuit. He also fathered modern camera theory, if you look back and see the Jesuit influence. Now, let's go even farther. Now, do you know, now, Robert, I find this interesting. The Jesuits were the father of the modern cowboy movies. And if you look at this, it's incredible when you see who invented this, who started this, who created the cattle industry in Arizona. It all goes back to Jesuits. Now, I'm not going to go into the particulars, but I can back that up with facts. Then we get to this point I wanted to make. John 23rd made this announcement. He said this regarding the importance of the church's birthright to use the press, the cinema, radio, television, others of like nature. He said this, now Pope Paul VI amplified this in 1964. It was first mentioned by Pope John the 23rd. Now listen to what he says. He says, a special responsibility for proper use of the means of social communication rests on journalists, writers, actors, designers, producers, exhibitors, distributors, operators, sellers, critics, all those, in a word, who are involved in the making and transmission of communication in any way whatsoever. They have the power to direct mankind along to a good path or an evil path, by the information they impart and pressure they exert. It will be for them to regulate the economic, political, and artistic values in a way that will not conflict with the common good and will not conflict with the Vatican. Now, here's what John the 23rd said. Be entrusted, these film reviewing offices, who are experienced in cinema, sound, broadcasting, and television under the guidance of a priest specially chosen by the bishops. At the same time, we urge that the faithful, and particularly those who are militant in the cause of Catholic action, Jesuits and their protégés, be suitably instructed so that they may appreciate the need for giving to these offices their willing, united, and effective effort. Now, we can back this up by stating that even today, in America and in Britain, Robert, the Jesuits have a major control over our system of entertainment as well as television, radio, print, film, stage, and it's just an extension of Jesuit ratio studiorum, the great control of Jesuit education throughout the centuries. I thought I'd just lay a foundation because I know you have other facts, but I think it's quite interesting and very important to understand how the New World Order works.
Absolutely. In fact, now you mention it, if you look closely at standard reference books that you can find in your library today, take for example Encyclopedia Britannica, one of the great sources of information worldwide here in England and I'm sure also in the USA. The Encyclopedia Britannica was sold in around 1910 to the Rockefeller Institute in the United States of America, and its Jesuit editors ever since have been rewriting European history, American history, to conform to the version of history of the Roman Catholic Church. And you can find dozens of examples of this. There are several books on the subject dealing with the fraudulent or the completely contorted history of Europe, which you now find in the Encyclopedia Britannica. The removal of references to the Jesuits, for example, the removal of much reference to the Spanish Inquisition, to the witchcraft trials of Europe, etc., etc., etc. And this has been going on for the last century here in the standard classical reference work known as Encyclopedia Britannica. That's an amazing fact in itself, isn't it?
Incredible. And what I was mentioning about the, remember I said about the father of the cattle business? Now for all you cowboys out there in America who think that the Jesuits didn't have any say about what's going on in your life, let's look at what this priest did. He was a Jesuit. His name was Eusebio Kino. His statue is one of two representing Arizona in the U.S. Capitol building. He was a Jesuit professor from Ingolstadt College in Bavaria. Between 1687 and 1711, Kino introduced cattle and their management to southern Arizona. For this, he is gratefully remembered as the father of the cattle business. Pondering the works of Kirshner and Kino, we come to rather astonishing awareness. Kino's cowboys, as projected through Kirshner's magic lantern, indoctrinated America's earliest movie audiences with the underlying message of Jesuit theater and Catholic theology that knowing and obeying Scripture is not necessary in comprehending the ways of good and evil or in doing justice under natural law. So even in our cowboy movies, you see a Jesuit connection. Amazing.
Yes. Interesting also, if you look back into the 18th century, just before the French Revolution, was a great movement in France by the Jesuits and their occultist allies to create what was called the encyclopedists. The encyclopedists who produced a massive, many-volumed encyclopedia in France.
Mm-hmm.
The contributors to which included the philosophers Voltaire and Rousseau. Voltaire and Rousseau were clever. They were agents, occultist agents of the Venetian oligarchs. And it was the Venetian, in Venice, it was the Venetian oligarchs and their occultist friends who transferred their beliefs to England. And that's how England, the Bank of England, was founded. on occultist lines. It was the connection with Venice. And these philosophies, the occultists, merged through the Illuminati, which the Jesuits created, of course. This double-pronged attack, one of them conservative Catholicism, and the other was the creation through Ingolstadt and Weishaupt of the Illuminati, so that you have two different branches. One of them is the orthodox right-wing extremist Jesuit order that we know today, and the other one is the subcontractors of the New World Order, who are the occultists. The occultism are really the subcontractors of the Vatican's New World Order, and they react and interact with each other to this day.
Yeah, and I wanted to remind people that there was a group back around the 1920s called Catholic Action. Many people haven't heard about this group. And what they were doing was using cinema and radio to unite Catholic people with the Roman hierarchy, and that was the main purpose of Catholic Action. Now, you're going to see that this group had a lot to play with World War II, Adolf Hitler, and I want to show you this real quickly to show you the seriousness of what this is all about. And then we'll get back to, of course, your research that you dedicated 15 years of your life. But if you look back at 1922, Pope Pius XI had two great confessors. And it was Father Alessandri and Celebrano, and they were both Jesuits. The Pope was, in fact, installed in 1931, the first Vatican radio station. And then his National Film Review office was also there in 1922. Now, he, at that time, had made statements ordering Catholics into politics. In his letter, which is I will not mention the name of the letter, but it's in English, the translation is Containing the Flock. He warned that men of Catholic Action would fail in their duty if as opportunities allow it, they would not try to direct the politics of their province and their country. What they did then is they solicited Black Pope, who was the Jesuit general, Vladimir Ledikowski at the time, who we've discussed in depth in the show, the strategy of bringing Catholic nations in Central and Eastern Europe together into a pan-German federation. To head the federation, Ledikowski required a charismatic leader charged with subduing the communist Soviet Union on the east, Protestant Prussia, Protestant Great Britain, and Republican France on the west. Ledikowski chose the Catholic, along with the Vatican, chose the Catholic militarist Adolf Hitler, who told Bishop Berning in 1936 this is Hitler's words, there was no fundamental difference between National Socialism and the Catholic Church. He did not, had not the Church, he argued, looked on Jews as parasites and shut them in ghettos, I'm only doing, he boasted, what the Church has done for 1,500 years, only more effectively. Being a Catholic himself, this is according to Bishop Bernard Osnabruck, being a Catholic himself, he told people that he admired and wanted to promote Christianity. So we see this connection between Hitler. It's just incredible how this, and then using, of course, the media, propaganda machines like Pravda in Russia, things like that, to control the people. So you see this control even as way back as you were talking about with Mozart, which people say, well, what is this important? Why is this important? Well, isn't it important to understand how they can take and manipulate even what you read, even what you hear, even how you think? Now, when I grew up thinking of Mozart, I grew up thinking of this icon. I still, to this day, until I ran into you, I thought of Mozart as this great figure. Now, it's not going to change the course of history, but it sure did alert me to the fact to start looking into more things regarding Jesuit control and how they might be doing it today. So
the wonderful thing about Mozart is that if you study his life closely and the rise of his huge, giant career, you can see something quite unique. You can see the Jesuit order in full view. You can see the Jesuit order hidden within the fraternities. All of this will be given to you by studying the life and career and reputation of Mozart. He's unique because halfway through his life, the Jesuit order were forced underground, as we all know. And this is why the study of Mozart's life and career is so useful. I dare say that if you study any subject in enough depth, you will understand many things. And likewise, if you study the history of classical music, of culture, and of Western propaganda, or the propaganda of the elites, you would also come across the Jesuits. They're there, and they don't like the light. You know, they scatter. As soon as you throw light on something, they hide under the near